All right. Well, we are live and excited to be here today, even though I just kicked him out of the screen, because I always like to talk about people behind their back rather than when they're right next to me. So welcome to Intercultural Spark. This is the show about that spark inside each of us that drives us to spark change in the world. And we really like to have an emphasis on topics around diversity, equity, inclusion, communication and communication technologies, and also even just creative entrepreneurship. So today I have joining us pastors Geno and Shannon Olison. They set out about 11 years ago to create an intentional, inclusive, multicultural church when they were sent to start the South Suburban Vineyard Church in Flossmoor. So absolutely fascinating. They are an interracial couple and family. And so they walk the talk and live the life. And we're going to find out how they bring all that together to create this really intentional community. So welcome to Geno and Shannon Olison. Hi, good morning. How are you both?
Good morning. We're doing great. How are you?
I'm wonderful. Thank you. So I'm so excited that you, I like the drums in the background, that you've stopped the rock and roll band for a minute to join us today. So we found out early on that in addition to being pastors, actually Shannon has a master's degree in it's not sports psychology, in sports recreation, right?
Right. Sport management. Yeah.
Sport management. There we go. And so, because we always like to start the show with our flash exercise of the day, Shannon's actually going to lead us in our flash exercise.
All right.
One day, someone who has a band is going to hear me. I didn't just sing that, but someone's going to recognize that I'm singing the flash exercise and be like, let me get you something better. But in the meantime, Shannon, show us what we're going to do today. And I hope everyone who's watching live, we're all going to do this together.
Yes, joining together. So this is a great exercise because you can do this seated at your desk. You can do it multiple times throughout the day. So go ahead and bring your elbows up. And so make goalpost arms. That's what I always like to do. Goalpost arms.
I'm going to spotlight you for a second so that everyone can see it really well. Okay.
Goalpost arms. And then we're going to try and cross our elbows over. Now, you may not get all the way there. Geno is going to demonstrate how we probably won't get all the way there. And then from here, you are going to start by pressing the backs of your hands together. Now, this is where you feel comfortable and challenged. This is where you need to stay. And you're just going to gently start to lift your elbows a little bit higher. Take a deep breath, and you can feel your shoulder blades separate. Breathing is always good. If you want a little more challenge, you're going to take it so that your palms are actually going to interlace by coming around.
Wait, why is one of my hands so much lower than the other hand?
Yeah, so just turn your wrist around so that the backs of your hands touch each other. So let me do it again. Here we go. Goalpost arms.
Wait, Shannon, elbow over. Is my thumb supposed to be in my eye?
No. It's remedial. This is remedial.
Thanks, Geno.
Some of our yoga folks can get those palms together.
Fabulous.
Wherever you are today. And then just take a deep breath. Mm-hmm. And you're going to feel that stretch through your shoulder blades. Let's unwind. Let's try on the other side. So
remember from the other side. Okay.
Yeah. Yep. You might feel better on the other side. The other side might be better. Elbows cross over. Backs of your palms, the backs of your hands together. And if you'd like, then you can place those hands. Let's do one more deep breath here. And go ahead and unwind. Now, if that was challenging for you, my recommendation is that you need to get into a yoga class. But this is just a great stretch. Even if we're just coming and doing the best we can, this is something that you can see progression as you do it on a daily basis. I would say, even if you try it every hour, that's a great flash exercise to do on your own.
As a marketer, total respect for Shannon. And where do you teach yoga, Shannon?
Yes. So for the HF Racket and Fitness Club. There you go. Yes.
So that's so funny. So I love doing the flash exercise. And as I always say, there's a little known genre of fitness called interpretive aerobics, which is where your exercise has much deeper meaning and relates to what you're talking about. And so what I loved about that exercise that you showed us, Shannon, is one, just that intertwining. we're talking about the intertwining of cultures and ethnicities and races. So that's sort of our topic today. And that also yoga, which also an approach to life through faith also can be, which is very calming and centering. So that exercise was very symbolic of what we are going to talk about today. So if you're watching live, I invite you to ask questions in the comments, or after the fact, we can always catch back up for any answers. So let's dive right in. So Geno, you grew up on the south side of Chicago, and you had mentioned, you had mentioned that your church growing up was overwhelmingly, or was basically that everyone there was African American or people of color. Right. So let's just, for a frame of reference before going to creating a multicultural church, what did church look like for you growing up?
Oh, so not only was I in that church, my parents were the pastors. So they, after they came to faith, joined the church on the south side of Chicago, and they were sent out to plant their own church on the south side. And they started a church in the YMCA, which was 2 blocks from my house. And my neighborhood was almost exclusively African American. So naturally, churches draw from the neighborhood, especially in Chicago. And so it was, if my memory serves me right, it was exclusively African American. It was a Black church, so I was raised in a Black church. So it's very spirited preaching. People weren't afraid to show emotion, and we really expressed all the cultural realities of Black culture: music, expression, storytelling. And so to see that all wrapped up in my faith context was actually my baseline. That was what was normal for me. And so all that changed for me. I'm sorry.
No, I was just curious about Shannon in terms of what her experience was in church growing up.
Yeah, so I grew up in Champaign, Urbana, so where the University of Illinois is, and I grew up in the Lutheran church, and my faith community was, to the best of my knowledge, 100% white. And so it's a Lutheran church background. Yeah. I'm from 6 generations of, strong Lutheran church on both sides of, both sides of my family. And it's what I knew. And so growing up, I went to a Lutheran church with all white people. I grew up in Urbana, which is not, it's not all white. It's a university town. So I did have interactions and meaningful interactions with people of color, but my particular social circles and faith circles were predominantly white.
Mm-hmm. And Geno, I recall you saying that when you ended up at Champaign, because that's where you went to school, that you actually did not have ongoing regular interactions with people of different races. Did I get that correctly?
No, what I would say is that was the first time for me that I was interacting with different races, because my social network, church, school, everything like that, where I grew up was almost exclusively Black. When I got to the University of Illinois in 1999, that was the first time I was interacting with different kinds of people, especially like an overwhelmingly white space. So that was really culturally disorienting for me when I got to Champaign.
And how did that feel? So did you seek out a faith community once you were there?
Well, yeah, I remember as a person of faith, I mean, I was a church kid. I'm a preacher's kid. So I feel like when I got to school, I had 2 choices. I could try to catch up on all the fun that my parents didn't let me have, or I could find a community of faith to plug into. And honestly, I remember vividly being my first night at the University of Illinois. My roommate hadn't gotten there yet. And I realized for the first time in my life, I had a choice whether or not I was going to go to church or not. I had a choice. And honestly, I literally didn't know anything else. I didn't know anything else. I felt uncomfortable, like not going to church. And so some people on campus, the InterVarsity was a Christian fellowship that I joined. My sister was a part of InterVarsity on her college campus at Augustana College. And so I had heard of InterVarsity. And so I started going to a small group, which is like a Bible study on campus. And I also started going to Twin City Bible Church, which was right across the street from my dorm. Both of those communities of faith, though, were overwhelmingly white. And so, again, I go from the Black church and now I'm a part of 2 white, Christian organizations.
How did I have so many questions, and I want to jump from school to where you are now, but I
Mhm.
am curious in terms of, well, actually, I'm curious how the two of you ended up meeting, and then also how, what should we do? Oh, you guys looked at each other. Do that one first. Then I'll ask you. I'm just curious how you felt being a minority in the faith context where you're supposed to feel just completely, naturally, completely bringing your whole self. But
Yeah.
tell us, everyone always loves origin stories. How did you guys meet each other?
I don't think we have consensus yet on how. That's why we laugh, because our story is a little bit different. Our memories are a little bit different. But you go ahead.
Well, I think so. I grew up, growing up in Champaign-Urbana. When I left for college, most of my high school friends they stayed and went to the University of Illinois. I did not start off at the U of I, but I had friends who were actually living on the same floor as Geno. So my high school friends became Geno's college friends. And actually our very first encounter was I was back from college, and one of my high school friends asked me to go to an intervarsity large group meeting with him. And so I went with him to this large group meeting for intervarsity. And on the way back from the meeting, Geno actually walked with us. So the three of us kind of walked back across campus. So that was our very first encounter.
And I don't remember that.
But we didn't really interact. And so then that kind of was like, that was it. But then he kept hanging out with my high school friends. And so when I would come home for, breaks and over the summer, he was like hanging out with my friends.
I remember that part.
And then I moved into a house, a college house with some friends that he was, friends with. And he kept hanging around. Like he just would show up every day, and he was there all the time in our house. And so then,
I think he's trying to decide if he remembers that part or not.
I remember that part. So how she says we first met, I don't remember that.
Okay.
So I don't. She's not a liar, so I'm gonna trust her.
Well, actually, isn't your email address like I love my wife or something like that? One of you has an email address that's I love my wife. So
her name shows up as best wife ever in my.
That's what it is. Best wife ever.
I didn't create that. She did that in my email thing. And
I just wanted him to remember that I was the best wife ever for him. So
there's no good way to change that.
Right, you can't go back from that.
Smart man. So.
And so, I think we just kept hanging out, and then one thing led to another, and then we started dating. But to be completely honest, it was a very uncomfortable situation, probably more so for me than for him, in that I had never pictured my life as being connected to a Black man. Like, when you're little and you like think about what your life will look like, and you imagine your future spouse, or you imagine your kids and like where you'll live and all those things. Like, I didn't even consider that it would be a Black man. Like I considered my life with a white husband and a white family, and doing, all the things that I had done growing up. And so I would say the first 3 months of our relationship, I was hyper aware of the differences between the two of us.
Mm-hmm. And I would say that I didn't imagine myself, I just didn't think about it at all. I mean, I think my resting subconscious, especially growing up, you consider the fact that you'll marry somebody who looks like you. But by the time I got to school, and especially by the time I had met her, I was just so immersed in like different, this intercultural reality that I didn't think about it in that way. Of course, I was very aware of the differences between the people in my circle. But I didn't think that I would meet and marry somebody like her, nor did I rule it out. It just wasn't really thought. And
it's so much deeper than like our skin color, right? Like it's like culturally we have so many different, tendencies and habits and patterns. Like these, worldviews and upbringing. I mean, South Side of Chicago versus, Champaign-Urbana college town. It's just these things even started showing up and continue to show up. I mean, we've been together for 18 years now. And so these things continue to show up as how different we really are.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm. Well, let's connect that to actually one thing just to share. So I'm in a intercultural, interfaith relationship. I'm Jewish. My husband is not. I'm born in the USA. He's born in Brazil. So all those things that come up. And I think there was that moment where they say, he said something, and I remember my mind going, I didn't expect like all the things that I would look for to be in this package. I just hadn't thought of it that way. So now, and I am curious about this. So now you're living this interracial family and bringing together, raising four sons, but also you have founded the South Suburban Vineyard Church, which is a very conscientious multicultural community.
Mhm.
So how do you, I guess, and it begs the question too, because I've heard the phrase a church planting church, like you planted this church. Can you just help for our viewers? What does it mean to plant a church? And then how did you add that layer of multiculturalism to it?
Sure. Well, you plant a church like you plant anything, like you started from nothing, right? And so lots of people pass churches every day as they drive to work and school. I mean, pass dozens of churches. And a lot of people don't consider the fact that there was a time when that church wasn't there. Somebody started that church. And so we planted out of a larger vineyard church in Champaign, Urbana. And so part of what happened when I got to college a couple of years in, somebody invited me to go to the Vineyard Church of Urbana. They call it the Vineyard Church of Central Illinois right now. And so I became a part of that church. And I mean, 2 years into my college experience, I was still very aware of the cultural differences around me and that I wasn't at my home base. But 2 years in, I got more comfortable. And so when I showed up at the Vineyard, a large, overwhelmingly white church, I was still very aware of that piece, but it wasn't as disorienting as it was when I first got to town. So I started to fall in love with this church, the philosophy of ministry. The leaders were very humble and accessible, and just how they did church really made sense to me. And so at the same time, I was very aware of how much it cost me culturally to be one of the very few Black people in this church, right? And so there was a source of frustration that it was costing me so much to be in this community.
And what do you mean like that when you say it cost me? Like, what did that feel like?
Well, there's a term we use called cultural needs, right? And you're not aware of your cultural needs until they're not getting met, right? And so if you talk to somebody who is in their natural habitat where their cultural needs are being met, they might say, well, what are cultural needs? Now, even if a person of color has never heard of that term before, if I say my cultural needs weren't getting met, they know they intuit what I mean. Basically, culture is like what makes you laugh, what foods you eat, stories you tell, like all the stuff that we don't talk about that we just are, right? And there's distinct cultural realities that different ethnic groups have, right?
Sure.
And so,
I think I've heard of that as like code switch, the idea that when you're with your own, with people who identify the same as you do, that your behaviors may be different. Whereas if you're, let's say, a minority in a group, you might behave, or you might not bring your full self to the table because of feeling different or feeling as a minority within a group. Yeah,
that's certainly a part of it.
And I think see it too, one of the things that I think white people are probably less flexible at doing is like getting in situations where they are the only white person. And so if a white person were to go to an all Black church, they would probably immediately start to realize that their cultural needs were not being met, so to speak. And so I think that's kind of what I think about is, my first experiences in an all Black church helped me to understand what it might feel like for Geno to be in an all white church when I went to an all Black church.
I think that's so important. I've actually taught classes like on intercultural things or interfaith understanding. And I always say, I'd like to give that as a homework assignment, to go to do your weekly family grocery shopping at an ethnic grocery store, or to go to that church, to have that experience of being the other. Because I think particularly for being white, Shannon, I don't know if that was your experience, it's so easy for us to because white is the majority, you don't actually have to claim your race or your ethnicity until you're the only. Then all of a sudden it's like, oh, I'm so white, or if it happens internationally, I'm so US American. Like you feel that in the distinction.
And we're not used to feeling that. And I feel like that makes us less compassionate, sometimes less empathetic. We need those experiences, and they make us better.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So lots of churches will say, well, we want our church to look like heaven. Basically to say, when we all get to heaven, it's going to be a very diverse reality, right? But part of what I've come to understand over the last few decades is that that's easier to say than it is to do. And as a person of color who have been in faith spaces like that, particularly where they weren't actively doing the hard work, making themselves uncomfortable, sort of sharing that discomfort of being in an intercultural space, the costs are pretty high for a person of color to be in that space, as opposed to a white person who might be, in their cultural sweet spot. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. Well, it feels like you're having to give up that you're having to give up something. That if you're a minority in the community, or if you're the only person of color, let's say in a church that's primarily white, is it that you're not able to fully open your heart in that space because of those differences? Or
I wouldn't describe it that way. I would just say, whiteness is centered in white spaces, right? And we talk about a lot in intercultural spaces, decentering whiteness. Not that white people are bad or that even whiteness is bad, but nobody wants to always be doing business at somebody else's cultural center. It's just a lot of work, right? And so in a church that their stated value is to be multi-ethnic, multicultural, what that church should be working hard to do is make sure that we all share the discomfort, which basically means we are signing up to be a part of a faith community where we know we won't get all of our snacks all the time, our cultural snacks all the time. It doesn't mean we have to become somebody else. That means that we decrease, particularly if we're the dominant culture and we're taking up a lot of space, as whiteness tends to do in America, just by virtue of our history and the power and wealth inequities. White people have to willfully decrease, particularly if their stated value is diversity. They have to willfully decrease so that we're sharing that discomfort. What typically happens, though, is that the church doors are open to different kinds of people, but not welcoming. In other words, if we're open to different kinds of people, we say, hey, the door's open. You can come in here. We're not going to change how we sing. We're not going to change how we do ministry. You are welcome. You can come in here, but we're not going to change anything for you. To be welcome to different kind of people seeks to make sure there's something on the table for them. Does that make sense what I'm saying? And so
it does. And actually, I'm going to show, because one of the things you talked about with that. So that's actually a critical concept in diversity, equity, inclusion as well. It's not enough to say, okay, we're going to have, superficial or visible diversity. It's how are you including, engaging people? And I think that you had mentioned, or one thing that you do that makes sense, is make sure that your team is also diverse. So you've got that reflected in the people who make up your team and your pastors at the church.
Yeah, that's been a big part of us from the start, because we watched a number of churches struggle to once they get started as a monocultural church, is super hard, nearly impossible. It's not impossible, but it's nearly impossible to turn that around because of how you started. And so we thought, well, if we want to be successful, we need to start with the diverse team, and we need to intentionally move to a place that is diverse and proud about that diversity. And so part of how we got started as a church, a lot of that was birthed out of what I would call a holy discontent where I was. I was frustrated that it cost me so much to be in this place. And so in the vineyard, we believe that the Lord speaks, right? We believe that the Lord leads and guides us. And so I didn't hear an audible voice from the Lord, but I felt like the Lord said to me, hey, when you start your church, make sure it's not that way. Make sure it's a place where a large cross section of people can come and gather. And so in June of 2009, we moved with 11 other people from Urbana, Champaign, to the south suburbs of Chicago here in Flossmoor. With a diverse team, we moved to a diverse city, and we started the South Suburban Vineyard Church.
Let's take a look. I want to do, this is another section of the show that we like to do, and it's a way to really look at a lot of information quickly. So this is called our Flash Photo Stories. All right. So we're going to go ahead. Can you just tell us, I think for each of these, I'd love to know what's happening in each of these pictures for an idea, because I think it relates really well to what happens in the church. So you had a good visual picture of it. So what's going on here?
This is 2 years ago. We took out our original church plant team, and so the two boys in the left side, those two guys were babies when we left on our church plant. But this is our entire original church plant team, and so as you can see, there is diversity in the team that we took with us. And this was our 10-year celebration. They are all still with us and serving us in our church.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, fantastic! And what about here? That's wonderful.
This is us. We had just finished the Illinois marathon weekend. Now, we didn't run the marathon portion. We'd done the 10K this day. And so we are proud U of I alumni. And so this is us standing on the field at Memorial Stadium.
Okay. And what's this? I understand that music is actually a really big part of the services that you do. So this is your space. This is your church, correct?
This is our COVID reality right now. 2/3 of the chairs taken out of the auditorium. And this is actually a couple of weeks ago where we had started back in-person services. And of course, Shannon is preaching. This is a Sunday morning for us, socially distanced.
In a space that we have renovated slowly and, piece by piece.
And did I see somewhere that you're going to be doing an outdoor service coming up? Or you just had that?
It was a tailgate.
Yeah,
it was a tailgate.
With COVID reality, we've been adjusting how we've been doing life. And so we feel like Chicago Bears fans know how to tailgate, so can we. And so we open up our parking lot, and we everybody pops open their trunks and brings their chairs and their fire pits, and we sit around and we tailgate in the parking lot. And it's our way that we can, be together and also stay physically distanced and make sure that we still build community even in this COVID reality.
Right, because everybody's not comfortable coming back indoors yet. So try to have something.
So you're doing things online as well as in person, correct?
Yes.
This looks like fun. Oh, is this the tailgate?
No, that's the 4th of July parade that we do. Homewood does a 4th of July parade every year, and we participate. We march in the parade, and we have 2 big deep freezers on a flatbed truck, and we pass out freeze pops as we walk the parade route. So I don't know. That's probably 4 or 5 years ago.
No, I think that was like 2 years ago.
2 years ago.
2 years ago. And, when we first walked in the parade, we had kind of that first picture that you showed. We just had probably about 20 people that first parade. And just every year we continue to grow our team and our church. And so this is just one way that we serve the community by walking in the parade. And again, as you can see, exponentially, because we started with a diverse team, our people continue to draw diverse crowds. So like this is kind of a picture of our church.
Well, I'm sure there's probably people who would seek that out as well, as because diversity is such an important issue, and interracial understanding, just with everything that's been happening in the world for the past year. I would imagine that you're finding people who are specifically seeking out a church that's more inclusive.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Baseball?
Right. I included this picture because I feel like as a lifelong Cubs fan, I included this picture because I feel like one of the things that's been important for us over the years is to make sure that we maintain a solid family sense of, separate from the church. And so somebody gifted us tickets to a White Sox game. And so our family, the 6 of us, attended this White Sox game. And we sat in the box seats, and it was probably one of the best nights of our entire lives. It was just such an amazing experience, but it just demonstrates this reality that it's important for our family to, have some things that we do that aren't church related.
Oh, so interests outside. And it sounds like, though, that idea of being a Cubs fan who was willingly going into a White Sox venue, another layer of practicing what we're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying. I feel like the Sox, they're a little bit more friendly toward the families than the Cubs, this stage in our lives with our kids' ages. So
Sure. And I think, was that the oh wait, we have one more.
Oh, yes.
The John Deere Pavilion. What was this one?
All right, so this one I included because one of the things that happens as pastors is that we get the opportunity to travel when Geno speaks at different churches. They invite him in, and often he speaks on the topic of multicultural churches, or like what it means for, for us to be building this multicultural church. And oftentimes Geno is perhaps the first Black man that some of these people have ever heard preach, outside of TV and things like that. And so the Vineyard movement, I would say, is working toward becoming more diverse, but they're not there yet. And so I included this picture because we went to a Vineyard church in the Quad Cities area, and we took our kids so it's Iowa, and we went to the John Deere Pavilion, and our kids talk about this being the best vacation of their lives.
It wasn't even a vacation.
It wasn't a vacation.
Really?
But just the opportunity to travel, they've been to Disney World and Mexico, and yet still Iowa and the John Deere is their best.
What was it that struck out to them? And does the John Deere, do they have like the John Deere museum kind of thing as well? Was that
you can go and climb on all the stuff and
huge and it just also demonstrates the life that our kids get to lead is like this strange mix of like, the full Black culture and also full white culture and all the things in between.
Especially
and so
holidays.
Yeah, holidays are an example of where we get to see this, but that we can play on tractors in a John Deere museum.
Actually, and I've got pictures that my son and I have been to that museum as well, which was just so much fun with all the big equipment that you can climb all over. So, I thought it was interesting. This is actually a quote from Geno that I saw, but I did want to just lead into my final question here. You had said our instinct as humans is to simplify big and complicated things, to fold them down into something that's portable that you can just put in your pocket. And that this issue was too big and too complicated to do it. You said the challenge is don't be afraid to sit in the discomfort. So, and that connects, Shannon, to what you just said is that, everything's not about the church. It's not all intentional, or maybe it is, but there's space for fun as well. And I'm just wondering, as an interracial family building this multicultural, multi-ethnic church, how do you see all this intertwining between your professional and personal in terms of that spark? I'm going to tie it back to the spark that you're bringing to the world. It feels very aligned. Is that your experience of it?
I think that when I consider what my life looked like 20, 25 years ago, I had no imagination for what my life would look like in this context. And I am, at this point in my life, so passionate about helping people connect to, whether it be the multicultural church or just to do life with people who are different, because I would say that there's no going back. Like, I've seen too much to like stop pursuing a life where I get to interact in very close contact with people who are different than me. And I love it. I am a better person. I am a better employee. I am a better wife. I'm a better mother. I'm a better friend because of the people in my life who are different than me. And so I feel like when you talk about that spark, I feel like that spark is something I feel like, man, if people only knew, if they only had imagination for how great their lives could be, just by, maybe starting off small, like having one interaction or a solid friendship with someone who's different. And that can be racial differences. It could be, cultural differences, all of those different things. It's just added so much to my life that I feel that I want to share that with other people. I want to say, go for it. You've got to do some of these. You've got to take some steps and get comfortable, especially as a white person. You've got to move forward in some of these things, because I think it'll change your life for the better in 100 different ways.
And I realize too that this can all sound a bit kumbaya-ish, like we are the world. And there is just an important social reality to this, but we're church people, right? And so we believe, Jesus Christ and his mission is at the center of our world, center of our life. And in scripture, it tells us that we're supposed to go into all the world and make disciples. Like, we're actually supposed to go and tell other people about what we found in Christ. And it's really hard to go into all the world and do that if you only value, or if you overvalue who you are and your cultural reality. And so we believe that a diverse church is designed to help people find value in places where they missed it before, so that they might, when they go actually out into the world, into where they work and where they go to school and in the marketplace, they can see different kind of people and see value in places where they didn't see it before, so that they can continue the mission, right? And so there's a real faith reality at the core of what we do and why we build in this kind of church. It's not just so we can look really nice in a picture together.
Sometimes we call our church Love University. We're teaching people how to love one another in our church so that they can go out and do that in their world, wherever their circle of influence may be.
I love that idea too, because I always am a firm believer that God is love. That idea of people say, what would Jesus do? It's also kind of what would love do? That's a really good guide. We are out of time. I'm going to ask you to stay for a second after I end our show. The part that we didn't get to, and I appreciate everything that we did talk about, is that we talked about your relationship, everything you bring to the church. But I just have to throw out there that Shannon also actually works full time at the Park District. She teaches at DePaul. She's you have 4 children that you're raising together. So we barely scratched the surface of what your day to day. I can't even imagine what your day to day life must look like.
Superwoman. This is Superwoman.
Absolutely. So thank you so much for being here. Don't go anywhere, because I have questions about, you teach at the School for New Learning at DePaul, which is an amazing program. I think I mentioned that's where I did my master's program. So so we'll talk about that. For anyone else, I'll put the link in the comments, but that's actually a great program for people who have brilliant things. Look at me, brilliant things to bring to the world, but there's not an existing program, which is it makes so much sense that that's where you teach, because you had a vision for something that didn't exist in the world, and it's how do you go about making it happen. So so thank you so much. People can find you at the South Suburban Vineyard.org. You're on Instagram and also Facebook. And thank you for joining us, and thanks for all that you're doing.
Thank you for having us.
Oh, my pleasure.